Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm very excited to talk about the gut microbiome and the role that it has in Parkinson's. So that's our agenda today: the gut microbiome, gut health, the implications of inflammation, how to alter it with nutrition. And I wish Dr. Martello was still here, because I'd love to have a chat with him about nutrition, where the research is headed in the gut-brain axis. So to get started, what is the microbiome? How many here have heard about it? Let's just see it raise. All right, we've got a good number. It is essentially the collection of bacteria, virus, fungi that reside within your whole body. So the majority of your microbiome is in your gut. However, you have a skin microbiome, you have an oral microbiome, and they're all interconnected. So what does the microbiome do? Essentially, your microbiome is in the gut, is responsible for digesting the food that you eat and turning it into short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids are magical molecules that are really quite important for the integrity of your gut lining. They strengthen the epithelial cells that we'll get into along your gut. And there are three main types: butyrate, acetate, and propionate. We're going to get a little sciencey to begin with, so bear with me. But these molecules are the most well-researched. They can directly enter into your bloodstream, so this is your blood down here. And they can actually, through your blood system, circulate to your brain and pass through the blood-brain barrier. So they affect the energy of your gut cells, energy within your body, and most importantly is they actually can modify your immune system. 70 to 80% of your immune system is in your gut. So the most influence you can have in terms of how your body feels and reacts to toxins or foreign invaders is actually within your gut. So the cool part is, just to give a heads up, the research is demonstrating that microbiome has an effect on tremendous amount of diseases and chronic illnesses. So neurological and psychiatric disorders, mood disorders. I can't open the news. Once a week, I at least get an article about how mood or depression or anxiety is actually having an impact on your gut. The metabolic and cardiovascular conditions are also intertwined with your microbiome. Obesity and type 2 diabetes are very much linked to the makeup of the microbiome or the bugs in your GI system. Autoimmune and inflammatory diseases, so IBS, IBD, Crohn's, have an impact on what your gut microbiome looks like, and even cancer. So immunotherapies now are, typically, their response before immunotherapy is to provide a broad-ranging antibiotic to wipe out your immune system, or your microbiome, the bacteria in your gut. But what most recent research is actually showing is that these antibiotics before the immunotherapy can worsen the outcomes and the uptake of the medication. So there is a lot of research happening in this space. And what I'm going to talk about is really at the forefront of where this research is happening for the gut and Parkinson's. I was at the Movement Disorder Society meeting in Copenhagen 2 years ago, and there was only one talk about probiotics and the effect that it can potentially have on Parkinson's. I was just there a couple weeks ago in Hawaii, and there were multiple talks around inflammation and the gut and the role that it can have in brain health and disease progression, which is pretty cool. So we're still at the forefront of this, but there is much, much research being intended and research now in this space. So what is the gut-brain axis? It is actually the bidirectional communication between your brain and your gut. The biggest connection is through the vagus nerve. So if you can see in yellow here, the vagus nerve actually connects from your brain to your gut, and the neurons are actually all throughout your gut lining. So if you've ever felt anxious or worried, sometimes you'll feel it in your gut. Your stomach doesn't quite feel right. Or when my 16-year-old, newly licensed 16-year-old takes the car and peels out of the driveway, I get a funny feeling in my stomach. And that's directly a result of the gut-brain axis. It's also connected. So that's the quickest interaction, is the vagus nerve. But your blood circulates compounds and chemicals connecting the gut and the brain. Hormones are actually produced in your gut, so serotonin, neurotransmitters, serotonin, GABA, dopamine are actually produced in your gut. So there's a lot of connection between your brain and the gut, and that's why there's a lot of research now happening to try to understand this and prevent or delay the progression of the disease. So this dysbiosis is an imbalance in those gut microbiomes. And research is pointing to this dysbiosis having a direct impact on many neurological conditions. So Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, depression, stress, mood disorders, and then neurodevelopmental disorders like autism, ADHD. All of these conditions, about 70 to 80% of the participants of these folks have GI issues. So by really paying attention to what's going on in your gut, we think we can alter the path forward. So let's get into this. Dysbiosis is the imbalance of the gut and the brain. Dysbiosis is the imbalance of the microbiome in your gut. This is my favorite picture. So we're going to get serious about your gut lining now. On the left side, it's symbiosis. So that's the ideal state we all want to be in. There's fantastic little microbes here digesting the food, the carbohydrates, proteins that you eat. There's a big mucus layer here that is a protective lining to stop pathogens and invaders from getting into your intestines and into your bloodstream. These are the epithelial cells, and I like to use my fingers. They look like little epithelial cells. They're nice and tight, close together, blocking things that shouldn't go through, allowing nutrients to pass. Your bloodstream, and then at the other side of your bloodstream is the lymphatic system, so your immune system. Everything's working well. When you start to have dysbiosis, the balance of microbiomes in your gut start to shift. So there's more of the bad guys, kind of the ugly-looking ones, pathogenic bacteria that start to outweigh the good bacteria. This causes a decrease in the mucus layer, little bit of the opening in the tight junctions with your epithelial cells. So you'll see this guy here is trying to get through. Some have already made it into the bloodstream here. Dr. Martello talked about paraquat as one of the toxins known for Parkinson's. TCE, trichloroethylene, is another toxin potentially implicated in Parkinson's. They can start to enter into your bloodstream because of this weakened gut barrier lining. Starts to elicit an inflammatory response, or your immune system starts to recognize these foreign invaders and starts to act on it, which is good. And you want your immune system is there in place to do those things. But the problem is, over time, as that starts to get even more out of balance, inflammatory response from your immune system becomes chronic. So your immune system and your inflammation is constantly working to try to stop these invaders, which puts pressure, stress on your system, and we don't want that. So you can see here in the leaky gut, have you all heard of the term leaky gut before? It's essentially just what it shows here. I'm Italian, I like to use my fingers and my hands to talk. This here shows a very dispersed epithelial cells within your lining, allowing toxins, bad bacteria to cross in and elicit this chronic inflammatory response. So inflammation is in the news a lot about how it's not good for you because it's a chronic response and your body overworks. It's a cause of a lot of the autoimmune conditions that happen. So what we want to do is actually reverse this. We want to get everybody, all of us, back into this symbiosis where your microbiome is balanced, you have tight junctions in your epithelial cells, and you don't allow those toxins to get into your bloodstream or elicit the immune response. As I mentioned, unfortunately, with Parkinson's, 70 to 80%, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, 70-80% have this dysbiosis, and as a result, a higher level of intestinal inflammation. So what we're showing here is a graph from a study that was done in 2019 that showed and tested the intestinal inflammation levels of controls versus those with Parkinson's. And you can see it's a much greater response in Parkinson's, which is unfortunate and not the direction we want to go. Also interesting is the short-chain fatty acids that I spoke about, those magical molecules. People with Parkinson's have reduced short-chain fatty acid production. The bacteria isn't producing the short-chain fatty acids like they should, and then your biological, metabolic, immune system doesn't work quite as well. So fecal butyrate, one of the most well-researched and positive short-chain fatty acids, is actually lower in people with Parkinson's. And I think the quite interesting part is it's correlated with motor symptom severity scores in Parkinson's. So in 2022, there was a study done correlating the butyrate levels with the progression of the disease. So the higher the butyrate level, the lower the score on the UPDRS, or the measurement of motor symptom severity in Parkinson's. The lower the level of butyrate, the higher the score. So there's a direct correlation. We don't know if it's a causation for sure, but it is a correlation. So our goal is to really delay the disease progression and stop this, improve the short-chain fatty acid production. Okay, so I mentioned I was at the Movement Disorder Society meeting in Hawaii. I got to hear Dr. Malu Tanzi speak about this, who's probably one of the most well-researched, forward advanced researchers in this space. She's talking about, our lovely dysbiosis of the gut. It causes this pro-inflammatory response. Alpha-synuclein here is a component that I'm sure you all have heard about. It is one of the markers of Parkinson's disease, one of the biomarkers. It actually starts to misfold in an inflamed gut environment. So because your gut is directly connected to your peripheral and immune system, chronic systemic inflammation causes the potential, there's some research saying that the misfolding of the alpha-synuclein actually happens inside an inflamed gut. So the more inflamed your gut is, the more potential for it to misfold and then travel to the brain via the vagus nerve. So the less inflammation we have, the less misfolding of the alpha-synuclein, and the less it can impact the brain and trigger the neurodegeneration. So this systemic inflammation then transfers, these circulating cytokines and toxins can actually get in and cross the blood-brain barrier. So there's a blood-brain barrier. I feel like I'm hunching over this. There's a blood-brain barrier. Do you want to switch? Perfect. Now I'm free. Life is good. Thank you. Okay, so where were we? This systemic inflammation can then transfer over to the blood-brain barrier. And there's a lot of current research and thought that your gut epithelial barrier is the same as your blood-brain barrier. So the more intact your gut is, the more intact your blood-brain barrier becomes. So with these propagating toxins, they enter cross the blood-brain barrier and then elicit your immune response in your neural cells, your neurons, that contain astrocytes and glia. I know these are all new terms. These are basically the immune system in your brain. It starts that, which then sends those out of whack. They're not doing what they should be doing, and it causes neurodegeneration. So this is a very probably detailed review of how that intestinal inflammation crosses the blood-brain barrier, activates the immune response in your neuronal cells, and causes neurodegeneration. So we want to stop this. If we can start to change this here, it stops the whole cascade of reactions and starts to actually modify the disease progression rather than just treating the symptoms. Okay, so to recap, we want to delay this disease. We don't want to just treat the symptoms. And inflammation has been purported to reduce we want to reduce the potential of alpha-synuclein and misfolding in the inflamed gut. So reduce the inflammation? Wow. Reduce the inflammation, reduce the alpha-synuclein misfolding. Oh, it's me. I can't hold two things at the same time. We want to reverse leaky gut. So really have that nice balanced microbiome to improve the blood-brain barrier and reduce the potential for toxins to enter. And then we do know that intestinal inflammation leads to neuroinflammation and neurodegeneration. So the more we can stop this process, the better. There's a lot of research happening in this space now. It is a very complex network of activities. Not to say that I understand it fully, but the research community, fortunately, is spending a lot of time to start to elucidate what is really happening from a mechanistic standpoint here. Okay, so what do we actually do about it is the question. We want to improve your microbiome and elicit a holistic response. Dr. Olken actually just posted a response from this Movement Disorder Society meeting saying that it is imperative that we take a holistic approach to treatment for Parkinson's. So sleep, relationships, exercise, stress, diet, all can play a role in delaying the disease progression. So I'm a big believer in exercise. We need to do it. It's not fun sometimes, but we can make it fun. Decrease stress and improve diet. As Joanne said, I'm a food scientist, so I immediately go to diet and food and how that can help. There was a question earlier about the Mediterranean and the MIND diet. On the left is the Mediterranean, so it really focuses on physical activity, a lot of water and exercise. At the base, there's really a high variety of fiber sources. So the more diverse your fiber intake, the better, because that feeds different microbiomes and creates a better balance within your gut. It's also, both diets, the MIND and the Mediterranean, are high in omega-3s, fish, seeds, and nuts. And sweets are enjoyed sparingly. Red meat is sparing. It's a high saturated fat product, and we want to focus on the low or monounsaturated fats. The MIND diet is very similar. It focuses a little bit more on berries, so the high antioxidant potential of berries, and a little bit more on leafy greens. It's a bit more prescriptive than the Mediterranean diet. These are great. They are wonderful if we can follow them. In reality, they're really hard to follow. Even myself, knowing all of this, I have a hard time getting this much diversity in my fibers and in my diet. So what we want to do is figure out how to start small and make little changes in habits to get these fruits and vegetables better integrated into our diet. So these are real-world examples of what the Mediterranean diet could look like. On the left, you'll see a whole half of your plate is fruits and vegetables. Right? The more diverse we can get in, the better. A quarter of it is lean proteins. This one shows a bunch of different lean proteins all at the same time. That's really hard to do, but it's just from an example standpoint of the types of foods that you should be eating. So steak, chicken, beans, eggs, and then the last quarter is really starchy vegetables. So grains, sweet potatoes, whole grains, flax seeds. These are all excellent sources of starchy grains. This is a healthy salmon, high in omega-3, and a rich diversity of fibers in the salad. There's one more diet that Dr. Lori Micheli has been talking about, and it's the Pro-21 diet. She's done a lot of research trying to understand observationally how can we evaluate and delay disease progression through diet. She has published recently on the Pro-21 diet, which has you fill out, the intention is not to be able to read the Pro-21 diet, but it's a checklist of how have you been doing, what types of foods have you been eating. The green is the types of foods that you want to encourage. So there's nuts and seeds, olive oil, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, seafood. The good thing I'll call out for this group, wine is actually on this list. So red wine has a lot of positive polyphenols, resveratrol in it. And the avoid is pork, beef, chicken is actually in here. Juices, sugar, soda, the types of foods that we typically know we shouldn't have, you have them more at moderation. And what she's been able to show is that the people who had at least 15 points on this rating scale and the Pro-21 diet proceeded to have a 43% slower rate of progression over the next 10 years. That's substantial. So diet, and the Mediterranean and the MIND diet also had positive implications. I think the Mediterranean diet is said to reduce the onset of Parkinson's by 17 years, based on the latest research. So exercise and diet truly do have an impact on the disease progression. And the sooner we can all start in making these changes, the better off we'll be in the long run. Okay, so back to my fantastic guy with our gut microbiota. These three diets have two elements in common: plant-based, diverse set of fruits and vegetables. It's the fiber that you need to feed the microbiome to produce these short-chain fatty acids. Then they're both, all three of them are high in olive oil or monounsaturated fats. More lean meats, less of the red meat. Fiber, I love fiber. Okay, why do I like it so much? 90% of Americans fall short on the recommendations for fiber. So it's not just Parkinson's. It is our whole nation who have progressed with the standard American diet, which is typically overprocessed and removes essential nutrients and fiber. And as I hope I've shown you before, that fiber is critical for feeding the microbiomes and keeping your immune system in check. So what do we want to do? I actually wanted to test this out myself. So being in the food industry, knowing how to make products, I put together a fiber bar that has 11 grams of fiber, which is quite hefty, and gave it to Parkinson's patients for 1 bar a day for 4 weeks to see if we could make a difference. So it was an open label trial, pilot clinical, where they kept everything, exercise, diet, the same. The only thing we did was add in 1 bar a day to increase the fiber intake. We had pretty profound results. So our intestinal inflammation was reduced in 4 weeks significantly. Constipation, 75% of the people ingoing with constipation actually saw an improvement, which is fantastic. I haven't talked a lot about constipation. Dr. Martello got into it, but it's chronic. I was just at the I was at the American Academy of Nutrition meeting recently, and they're talking about pediatricians came to us and said pediatrics are having big issues with constipation. So it is a wide-ranging disease that we need to start to improve. And fiber is one of the key ways to do that. And finally, we saw cholesterol reduction. So total cholesterol and the bad LDL was reduced, which is pretty phenomenal. So all of these changes with just 1 bar a day for 4 weeks demonstrated a pretty positive improvement. We also saw quality of life measures. So we had the participants take the UPDRS scores and rate themselves, and it showed a decrease in the UPDRS score from before to after, which is fantastic. Sleep improved, constipation improved, and then the UPDRS, not symptom scores. Yes, sorry. The UPDRS score is the standardized way that neurologists test the progression of the disease. So Dr. Martello talked about the H and Y score. This is just another scoring system similar. And I think depending on the neurologist, some use the H and Y score and some use the UPDRS score. So every time you go into the doctor, they evaluate based on symptoms. And there's non-motor symptom scoring and there's motor symptom scoring. For our purposes, we looked at the non-motor symptoms. So constipation, muscle stiffness, speech, and getting dressed yourself, those types of activities. So as I mentioned, the trial was 4 weeks. We were lucky to have a couple participants continue on and taking 1 bar a day. One actually showed that, I'll get this pointer down. He started here. It was a 259 micrograms per gram was his level of intestinal inflammation. After 5 months of using this, he was actually down to 15, to a normal, healthy level, which is incredible. He's still on the bars today, and he feels better as a result. Again, this is a one-person example, so these results are not going to be the same for everybody, but his improvement in intestinal inflammation and ability to move and less aches and pains is pretty profound, which is amazing. And then we tested it further too, and we had one participant take the bars for 3 months and then stop taking them. And we tested his fecal calprotectin again, and his inflammation levels went up. So it just points to the fact that the more fiber you can intake into your body, the better. I'm a proponent of all types of fiber. So the bars are one way to do it in a convenient sense, but the more of the Mediterranean and mind type of diet and lifestyle you can impart, the better off you'll be. So what's next? The science today is overwhelming in terms of how the gut microbiome and inflammation can truly affect the impact of this disease. There's constantly emails and articles from the Parkinson's Foundation and the Michael J. Fox Foundation about how controlling inflammation can really control the disease progression. This is just for perspective. So in 2005, there was only 12 studies in all of the neurodegenerative diseases looking at this gut-brain axis. And by 2025, there's 500 studies happening in this space. So there's clearly a desire to learn more and understand what's happening here. And then finally, this is one of my favorite pictures. All I'm trying to do is show how, for all of the neurological conditions, researchers are actually starting to understand which bacteria. So let's look at Parkinson's in the upper right. Prevotella and Enterobacteriaceae are actually, Prevotella is less, Enterobacteriaceae is higher in Parkinson's. These are the actual types of bacteria in your gut, and that's consistent across the board. They've been able to figure out which bacteria Parkinson's people are deficient in, and then through that, we can feed those bacteria particularly, the right fibers to make the good bugs grow. And they're doing this with every neurological condition. So this is Alzheimer's in the left, then you stroke, TBI, and they're really starting to figure out which foods and bacteria need to grow in order to change the course of the disease progression. So I just show this as to a neat bit of hope and excitement in terms of where we can go for more precision-type medications. So, hopefully, we've all figured out now that the gut is a vital part of our overall health. The gut and the brain communicate bidirectionally via the vagus nerve. Dysbiosis can be reversed by changing diet and incorporating more prebiotic fiber food for the microbiome. Less dysbiosis means less inflammation and the potential for reduced neurodegeneration. And then exercise daily and eat a plant-based, fiber-rich diet to really help feel better, move better, and have a better course of disease progression. Thank you.